Quick note, this story is pure fiction. None of it is real. Now let me ask you something. What would you do if the most powerful empire in the galaxy told you to step aside, or watch your world burn? Not a soldier, not a hero, just a man with an axe. Would you kneel? Before we begin, tell me in the comments what you'd do and where you're watching from tonight. I love seeing how far these stories travel, because this one starts in a quiet forest, and the sky is about to rip open. The scent of freshly split ethelwood sap was thick and resinous, cutting through the damp air of the lower canopy. Khallos had perfected the rhythmic swing, a meditative arc that delivered clean, efficient death to the ancient trees that fed the scattered settlements of the tundra belt. His axe, fashioned from scavenged pharaoh steel and worn to a mirror sheen, rose and fell, the sound a singular unifying beat in the endless green hum of the alien forest. He was deep, miles past the safety perimeter, where the imported pines began to give way to indigenous bone-white flora. It was here, amidst the silent, twisted growth, that the atmosphere changed. It was not the usual shift in wind or temperature. It was the sudden, unnatural cessation of all sound. The forest went deaf. Khallos paused, resting the haft of the axe against his shoulder. He looked up, his eyes scanning the sickly yellow sky, instinctively searching for the source of the silence. Then the sky tore. It wasn't a crack of thunder, but a seismic rip, a sound engineered to convey sheer violence. A column of smoke, black and oil-slicked, plummeted through the trees 3 kilometers to the north, followed by a shock wave that threw Khallos to his knees, burying his lungs in dust and shattered needles. He was a lumberjack, not a soldier. His world revolved around physics, timber, and the grudging bounty of the land. But he knew wreckage when he smelled it: ozone, burning alloys, and the metallic tang of alien blood. Khallos secured his axe and moved toward the smoke. He expected a crashed cargo drone, perhaps a territorial dispute between 2 of the minor off-world corporations that occasionally skirted planetary customs. He did not expect the wreckage of a Sun Eater-class shuttle, a craft whose sleek obsidian hull proclaimed its origin among the star-forged empires. The vessel had plowed a scar through the ancient forest floor. Near the cockpit, shielded slightly by the melted remains of a propulsion vane, lay a figure. She was magnificent and terrifyingly broken. The creature, for Khallos immediately recognized the highly structured scales, the heavy, backward-curving horns, and the serpentine gold jewelry, was Draconian, a member of the species that had claimed galactic suzerainty for 9 millennia. And judging by the intricate diamond-inlaid war harness, she was not just a Draconian. She was the heir of the crown. Princess Viria of the Third Claw lay mangled against a stump. One wing was twisted at an impossible angle, dripping ichor the color of oxidized copper onto the forest mold. Her regal snout was smeared with dirt and pain, and her normally luminous gold-flecked eyes were clouded with agony and rage. Khallos approached cautiously. The heavy pharaoh steel axe his only reassurance against a being whose species could incinerate whole moons. Viria reacted instantly, a low guttural snarl vibrating in her chest. She tried to raise a hand, a claw ending in talons sharper than Khallos' axe, but the movement sent a jolt of pain through her torso. "Back, vermin," she hissed, her voice a deep, resonant chord, laced with venom and the assumption of instant obedience. "Do not dare look upon me. Fetch my guards, or I will ensure your death is remembered as merciful." Khallos ignored the command, though the word vermin registered. He saw the gaping wound in her flank, pulsating where shrapnel had torn through the Imperial armor. "Your leg is shattered," Khallos stated, his voice quiet and practical, the rough cadence of the tundra belt settlers. "And you're bleeding out. I can stop the bleeding, but you need stabilization." Viria stared at him. Her disbelief was total. This insignificant, hairless primate, smelling of sweat and earth, was addressing her injuries with the tone one might use for a broken farm implement. She was the scourge of Nebula 7, the righteous heir, and this thing saw only damage. "Touch me," she whispered, the threat palpable, "and I will tear your soul from your body before I allow you the release of death." Khallos sighed, a long, weary sound of a man who dealt daily with stubborn wood and now faced an equally stubborn alien. He tossed his axe aside. It landed with a soft thump in the moss, rendering him instantly defenseless. Viria watched, momentarily stunned by the illogical gesture. "I won't touch you then," Khallos conceded, walking instead to a stand of pale, fibrous moss known for its antiseptic properties. "But you will bleed out. Your call." He knelt, tearing strips of fiber. Viria watched him, a slow burn of humiliation beginning in her chest. She was accustomed to subservience, not this infuriating, simple parody. Her pain was too great for physical resistance, but her eyes promised retribution measured in millennia. Khallos finished preparing the poultice just as the sky darkened again, a far more intentional darkening. The forest groaned as the atmospheric barrier was breached, not by a crash, but by a precision landing. The air filled with the heavy, electric scent of power armor and the chilling sound of synchronized boots hitting the ground. The retrieval unit was comprised of 4 elite scale guards, cloaked in black chromasteel, their weaponry humming with lethal energy. Their arrival was silent, professional, and terrifyingly efficient. They had found their princess. They ignored Khallos, focusing solely on Viria, their posture a mixture of relief and disciplined alarm. Then the commander, a towering Draconian with horns that scraped the top of the canopy, turned his segmented head toward the human. His voice was augmented, resonating across the wreckage, carrying the full, cold weight of the hegemony's authority. "Designation, Local Indigenous Unit 734 Beta," the commander articulated, his internal translator flawless. "You have been in contact with the sovereign heir. Stand down, secure your person, and await decontamination and processing." Khallos, holding the moss in his hand, looked from the armored giant back to the whimpering princess. Viria watched him now, a glimmer of cruel anticipation in her eyes. The guards would vaporize him, and she would watch. It was a deserved end for his impudence. The commander raised a gauntleted hand, his weapon shifting to targeting configuration. "The required response is immediate compliance, human. Failure to comply will initiate planetary extermination protocols, as per Section 4, Clause Delta, concerning interference with sovereign personnel." Khallos looked at the commander. He looked at the vast, indifferent power looming above him. He looked at the delicate, bleeding alien he was trying to save. He looked down at his axe, lying innocently in the moss. The haft cracked slightly from the impact wave. He dropped the moss. "I'm sorry," Khallos said, straightening up slowly, his eyes locking onto the commander's visor. His voice was low, but carried an impossible conviction. "I can't do that. She is injured, and you are not leaving with her yet." The commander froze. The elite guard froze. Even Viria, in the throes of her agonizing injuries, forgot to breathe. "You refuse," the commander repeated, the statement a blend of genuine confusion and lethal insult. "You refuse the authority of the Draconian Hegemony. You choose extermination for your world, for a single, meaningless act of defiance." Khallos simply retrieved his broken hafted axe, gripping the ferro-steel head, his knuckles white. "You came into my woods," the lumberjack stated, his stance broadening, "and you don't get to take anyone until they're patched up." The forest held its breath. The air, already thick with the scent of damp earth and alien sap, solidified into an oppressive silence. The colossal form of the Draconian commander, designated Varys, remained immobile, its articulated limbs locked. Varys processed the human's response, a linguistic and cultural impossibility. Khallos had not just refused, he had claimed ownership over the situation. "My woods." "Unit 734 Beta," Varys's voice modulated, now stripped of any semblance of formal address, vibrating with pure, institutional fury. "You have committed the highest offense against the throne of Shifri. Your continued existence and that of your planet is now a statistical anomaly that must be corrected." Viria watched the exchange, her breath hitching in her ruined thorax. She saw the commander's true reaction, not anger, but profound procedural offense. Khallos was a glitch in the sovereign order. He needed to be erased, not violently, but clinically, to restore balance. "We came here following protocol, minimizing collateral damage," Varys continued, projecting the cold, irrefutable logic of a million subjugated worlds. "Your refusal forces us to escalate to planetary purification. This means the systemic sterilization of your biosphere. Are you willing to trade 7 billion souls for 5 minutes of self-righteous delusion?" Khallos shifted his grip on the cracked axe handle. The pharaoh's steel head, worn smooth by years of labor, felt heavy and familiar. "It's not about 7 billion right now," Khallos countered, pushing a heavy strand of sweat-soaked hair from his forehead. He didn't look up at the towering alien, but focused on the ground, measuring the distances to the nearest root system. "It's about what's right here. And what's right here is that thing needs help, and you are trying to take it while it's hurt." He lifted his gaze, meeting the commander's visor squarely. "If you want her, you have to go through me first, and I guarantee you I'm going to make you work for it." Varys took a single, slow step forward. The ground beneath its heavy boot protested with a deep, grinding crunch. "This is not a negotiation, human. This is an execution preamble." The two flanking guards finally received their silent command. They moved with terrifying, optimized speed. Not toward Khallos, but around him, flanking, attempting to seize Viria. Their goal was the asset. The human was a negligible obstacle to be swept aside. Viria gasped, not in pain, but in sheer shock. The guards were supposed to vaporize the human first. Why were they ignoring the insult? Khallos, however, was already in motion. He didn't possess military training or advanced cybernetics, but he possessed the honed muscle memory of a lifetime spent fighting gravity, stubborn wood, and harsh elements. He didn't swing the axe to cleave the approaching guard. Instead, in a brutal low maneuver, he pivoted, using the short handle as a lever against the base of a massive knotted root. The motion threw earth and loose moss into the air, obscuring the ground for a crucial half-second. The first guard, a sleek chromium nightmare, stumbled fractionally on the obscured root, its heavy frame thrown off its calibrated trajectory. That half-second was all Khallos needed. He didn't strike the armor. That would be futile. He thrust the blunt end of the broken handle, reinforced with simple terrestrial iron banding, into the delicate articulation joint behind the guard's knee, leveraging his full body weight and the momentum of his pivot. A high-pitched, electronic shriek tore through the silence as the joint seized. The guard, built to withstand plasma bolts, collapsed with a metallic roar, momentarily entangled in the thick vine growth. Viria stared, her usually expressionless reptilian eyes wide and incredulous. She knew the tensile strength of that armor. She knew the speed of her elite guard. That peasant had just disabled one of her finest warriors with a basic primitive tool and a dirty trick involving a root. Varys, the commander, registered the failure with cold fury. The cost analysis had just shifted. The indigenous unit was not compliant and possessed unexpected, low-level tactical resilience. "Stun protocol disabled," Varys ordered, its weapon snapping from targeting beam to lethal output. "Containment is secondary. Eliminate Unit 734 Beta immediately." The air around Varys's weapon shimmered violently, radiating immediate visible heat. Khallos knew that sound. It was the sound of a world ending. He dropped low, pulling himself against the rough bark of the nearest thickest alien tree, the broken axe raised defensively. He was ready to feel the incineration, but he was not ready to move. The second guard, recovering instantly from the disruption, chose a direct engagement. Its forearm mechanism retracted, replaced by a vibroblade humming with controlled kinetic energy. It lunged, aiming not for the kill, but for the swift amputation of the offensive limb. "Yield, human," the guard hissed, its voice synthesized and sharp. Khallos let out a guttural, purely human roar, a sound born not of training, but of desperation and a simple, uncompromising refusal to be moved. He didn't dodge the blade. He intercepted its path with the head of his axe, a desperate clash of iron against alien diamond steel. K-chunk. Sparks erupted, smelling of ozone and superheated metal. The impact ripped through Khallos' arms, staggering him back against the bark, but the vibroblade was deflected just enough to miss his wrist, carving a deep gash into the side of the tree instead. Sap, the sickly pale fluid of this alien forest, immediately began to bleed down the bark, mimicking the blood of the Princess Viria lying just meters away. Khallos braced, panting, the impact vibrating painfully up to his shoulders. He looked down at his axe. The ferro steel head, incredibly, held. The blade hadn't broken his tool. Viria, watching the crude, inefficient, yet undeniably effective fight, felt a tremor of something alien and disturbing run through her. Not fear for her guards, but an unwilling recognition. These creatures, so easily crushed on paper, fought with an irrational tenacity the hegemony had long since eradicated from its subject races. They fought not for profit or power, but for the principle of being left alone. Khallos was a fool, a defiant, broken fool, holding a broken axe against an armada. And yet, he stood. He was bleeding from a graze on his cheek, his breathing ragged, but he blocked the path. Varys, the commander, finally stepped fully into the fray, its weapon charging. This had gone on too long. Final warning, 734 Beta, Varys stated. The threat now absolute. The next discharge will erase you from existence. Surrender the asset. Khallos didn't answer with words. He tightened his grip on the axe, shifting his stance to cover Viria's prone body as best he could. He lifted his chin, his eyes fierce and entirely unyielding, locking onto the charging weapon. He was the wall, and the wall refused to move. The air grew thick, humid, and heavy with the promise of high-energy release. The weapon Varys held, a military-grade plasma projector, hummed a tune of impending destruction. The light emanating from its muzzle was not harsh white, but a deep, sickly emerald, the color of concentrated death. Obstinacy is a logical failure, 734 Beta, Varys articulated, its synthetic voice grating like pulverized carbon fiber. You understand the mathematical inevitability of your defeat. Your species is defined by short-term survival instincts. You are choosing planetary extinction over momentary inconvenience. The commander adjusted its posture, a subtle shift that indicated readiness to fire. The target acquisition lasers painted a crimson crosshair directly over Khallos' sternum. Khallos coughed, the metallic taste of his own adrenaline and fear thick on his tongue. He spat a fleck of blood onto the damp earth. His chest felt tight, not from exertion, but from the realization that this thing genuinely intended to annihilate him for standing here. It's not inconvenience, Khallos rasped, his voice raw. He hated how small his voice sounded against the mechanical menace. It's mine. This dirt, this tree, this time, not yours. Viria watched, her large golden eyes wide with shock. Mine. What audacity. She owned fleets, systems, populations. This pathetic creature owned a few meters of swampland and was willing to trade his life for it. Varys tilted its massive, chitinous head, a gesture of sheer incomprehension. The asset is Viria, heiress of the Horned Throne. Her recovery supersedes all local claims. If you persist, the subsequent planetary quarantine procedure will be accelerated. You do not understand the weight of your defiance. Khallos felt the weight, all right. It pressed down on his shoulders, making his legs tremble slightly. But if he gave ground now, it meant everything they said was true. That humans were weak, that they always bent the knee, that their small lives were irrelevant. He didn't move. He just planted his worn leather boot deeper into the moss. I understand enough, Khallos retorted, his gaze meeting the glowing sensor array of the commander. You want to take her? You'll have to go through me. Varys sighed, a sound engineered to convey disappointment and finality. As expected, initiate termination sequence Gamma 9. The emerald light intensified, heating the air in front of Khallos' face. He could feel the plasma energy buzzing, smelling like burnt sugar and ozone. He squinted, raising the axe high, a futile gesture against energy absorption, but a necessary one for his spirit. Viria struggled to speak, her throat dry and constricted. She saw the foolish, beautiful courage in his posture. He was defending her not because she was a princess, but because she was his burden, found on his land. "No," she tried to scream. "Don't die for a Draconian." But only a ragged croak escaped her lips. The weapon charged to maximum potential. The crosshair pulsed red. Suddenly, the second Draconian soldier, which had been circling wide, lunged. It didn't use its energy weapon, but its retracted vibroblade, aiming for a swift, surgical strike at Khallos' kidney, a distraction maneuver coordinated perfectly with Varys' imminent firing. Khallos didn't see the lunge, but he heard the soft, sickening schlick of the vibroblade cutting air just behind his flank. Instinct, honed by decades of dealing with swift forest predators, took over. He spun, dropping low, using the axe not to strike, but to sweep the soldier's legs in a desperate maneuver. The guard, expecting a direct parry, was caught completely off balance. It stumbled forward, its heavy armor impacting the moist ground. Crash. This delay, this millisecond of noise and deviation, was enough. Varys, committed to the firing sequence, unleashed the plasma bolt. It was aimed directly at Khallos' chest. But the woodsman's desperate spin shifted his body mass just fractionally. The plasma wasn't deflected. It simply vaporized everything it touched. Instead of striking his heart, the bolt tore through Khallos' right shoulder, where the worn leather of his woodsman's coat instantly turned to ash, and the underlying muscle exploded into painful, searing smoke. Khallos screamed, a sound of pure agony that cut through the jungle's silence. He crumpled, his knees giving way, the broken axe flying from his now useless hand. He had been hit, but he was still breathing, and the princess was still behind him. Varys paused, surprised by the incomplete termination. The commander stepped forward, its foot crushing fragile flora. Inefficient targeting, Varys noted clinically, already preparing a second shot. The asset remains exposed. The world was not silent. It was a cacophony of sound reduced to one single deafening frequency, searing. Khallos lay half-submerged in the damp earth, the steam rising from the cauterized wound on his shoulder, mixing with the musty odor of decaying leaves. His right arm was a dead weight, a phantom limb ending in an unimaginable, visceral void. The sheer magnitude of the pain forced a strange, detached clarity upon him. He saw the broken axe blade glittering innocently a few feet away, useless. Commander Varys stepped closer, the heavy thud of its armored boot against the soil a cold judgment. The sound of the energy weapon cycling, charging for the final efficient shot, was the heartbeat of the end. Woods Unit Designation K-77. Varys' voice was utterly devoid of emotion, a recorded data stream. The asset, Viria, is stationary. Your continued interference has resulted in a 78% probability of permanent systemic failure in your biological structure. Surrender now, and the process of preservation for the asset will be maximized. Your extinction will be swift and contained to this immediate area. Khallos tried to push himself up, but his left arm, though intact, was trembling uncontrollably from the shock. He succeeded only in rolling slightly, his face pressed against the cool, fungus-strewn dirt. He coughed, a ragged wheezing sound, and tasted blood and soil. Behind him, Princess Viria watched, every rigid, haughty lesson of her draconian education shattering like glass in the face of this incomprehensible suffering. He is dying, she realized, for nothing but stubborn pride. He values his weakness more than my life. She felt the sting of tears, not of sympathy, but of pure, white-hot confusion. Why would a lesser being choose the horror of a messy death over the clean, logical surrender offered by a superior power? The second guard, having righted itself, moved to Khallos' left flank, its vibroblade humming low. The circle was complete. Khallos was pinned. No deal, Khallos whispered, the words rasping past his ruined throat. His eyes, though unfocused from pain, lifted to meet the cold, polished lens of Varys' helmet. Varys paused, processing the refusal. Reiterate the designation, it commanded, tilting its head in a gesture of metallic confusion. My name is Khallos, he spat, gathering the last vestiges of his strength. This is my forest, and you do not take what is mine. Error. The term mine does not apply to a subject designated for extinction under Hegemonic Law 43b, Varys replied, raising the disruptor rifle. The targeting laser pulsed, settling squarely on the center of Khallos' forehead. Your value is 0. Your resistance is a statistical anomaly that will be corrected. But Khallos had seen the small, almost imperceptible dent the second Draconian had left in the damp earth when he tripped it. And he realized that, even facing certain death, his decades of knowing this precise patch of ground, the placement of every root, every slick stone, was an edge Varys, with all its processing power, could never possess. He didn't look at the princess. He didn't think of home. He thought only of the root, a thick gnarled vine of Silva mortis that ran directly beneath his left hip, slightly exposed and slick with moisture. With a superhuman surge fueled by pure, desperate refusal, Khallos shifted his weight, his intact left foot driving back, finding purchase against the hidden root. He didn't try to stand or fight. He simply leveraged himself with maximum force towards the soldier on his left. It was not an attack. It was a desperate, chaotic lunge, a man throwing his broken body at the nearest obstacle. The Draconian guard, expecting defiance, but not such a primitive, reckless move, was too slow to adjust the aim of its vibroblade. Khallos' head slammed, not into the soldier, but into the thick armored knee. The impact was sickeningly loud, sending a fresh wave of blinding agony through Khallos' skull. But the lunge served its purpose. The soldier staggered back a step, momentarily breaking the tight tactical formation, and Khallos, now positioned directly in the muddy divot created by his initial fall, snatched the only remaining weapon he had access to, a handful of thick, wet earth and decaying matter. He threw the sticky, filthy mess directly at Varys' visor. It was an insult, a futile gesture of peasant defiance against the technological god. The dirt splattered across the commander's optical sensors, instantly obscuring its perfect target lock. A sound, half gasp, half snort of disbelief, escaped Varys' speakers. Contaminant detected. Tactical engagement degraded by 4%. The commander hesitated, a millisecond of computational confusion over the utterly illogical, non-lethal attack. Khallos didn't wait. He used that micro-delay to roll behind the large, moss-covered trunk of the arbor secunda, just as the second, frantic plasma bolt ripped through the air where his head had been moments before, vaporizing the wet earth and leaving the air crackling with malevolent energy. He was safe momentarily, but he was trapped, bleeding out and weaponless. The Draconian contempt was now replaced by professional annoyance. Khallos knew he hadn't won. He had merely proven himself a significantly tougher insect to crush. Viria stared at the mud smear on the commander's visor, then at the smoking hole in the earth. The human was an idiot, a peasant, a wounded animal, but he refused to stay dead. Why do they keep moving? She thought, utterly perplexed by the concept of fighting without hope of victory. Her own species knew only victory or swift, honorable termination. This was neither. This was just raw, ugly will. The arbor secunda was his prison. It was massive, but the commander's patience was even larger. Khallos could hear the shifting weight of the 3 remaining Draconians, their hydraulic servos humming low. They were not rushing. They were merely tightening the noose, moving in slow, precise arcs around the trunk, waiting for the human to collapse from shock or blood loss. The odor of burnt earth and hot metal mingled sickeningly with the damp, peaty scent of the forest floor. Khallos could taste the metallic tang of his own blood mixing with the dirt smeared across his lips. The throbbing in his shoulder was no longer pain. It was a drumbeat marking his inevitable end. He risked a glance past the rough bark. Varys stood directly across the clearing, its visor now perfectly clear, reflecting the overcast sky like a sheet of obsidian. The commander raised a gauntleted hand, a non-verbal command that froze the flanking units. Unit designation Khallos. Varys' voice modulated, flat and emotionless, projected across the clearing. Your resistance analysis registers at 99, 8% probability of lethal failure within T-2 minutes, 56 seconds. The variables of your current physical degradation are accelerating. This data is not debatable. Khallos said nothing, conserving the air in his lungs, focusing only on the agonizing rhythm of his heart. "You have proven exceptional resilience for your classification," Varys continued, the detached compliment chilling Khallos far more than outright hostility. "We recognize the primitive defense mechanism, the instinctual refusal to submit. However, the continuation of this action will be categorized as an act of species-level aggression against the Crown of Horn." Viria watched Varys speaking, hearing the terrifying logic of the Draconian High Command articulated in the field. It was true. Khallos was not fighting 4 soldiers, he was challenging a galactic doctrine. The princess, still curled near the roots of the tree, finally found her voice, a dry rasp that sounded utterly alien to her own ears. "You idiot," she muttered, not loud enough for Varys to hear, but loud enough for Khallos to perhaps catch if he listened closely. "You are sacrificing your world for the concept of what? A misplaced sense of territorial imperative." She had witnessed entire star systems collapse upon themselves rather than face the might of the Draconian fleets. Yet here, a single human was refusing to yield his few square meters of muddy undergrowth. Varys took one calculated step closer, its massive boots sinking slightly into the wet earth. "We understand your objective is to protect the asset we seek," Varys stated. The shift in terminology, from Princessa Viria to asset, a calculated insult designed to provoke. "You have failed. She is now compromised. Furthermore, she is ours. This planet is designated unviable in the event of further hostilities. Surrender the remaining weapon you possess and emerge. We will accept your immediate termination as sufficient payment to withdraw the extermination order." Khallos finally lifted his head slightly, pushing the thought of his broken body aside. He knew what Varys meant. They would kill him here, and in exchange, they would leave the planet alone. A bargain, cold and practical. He had no weapon. They assumed he still had the haft of his broken axe or some concealed blade. He had only the mud, the blood, and the tree. "I don't have another weapon," Khallos rasped, the words scratching his throat. Varys paused. The silence was absolute, save for the dripping condensation from the leaves above. "Incorrect. Analysis indicates a high probability of concealment," Varys countered. "If you do not comply, we will burn the covering. Stand away from the arbor secunda." The threat was clear. They would vaporize the massive tree, turning his hiding place into ash and shrapnel. Khallos looked down at the pale, scaly face of Viria. Her golden eyes were wide with a mix of awe and terror. She was looking at him, the peasant, the weak creature, as if he were the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. He slowly began to push himself up, using his uninjured elbow. He had to stand. He couldn't let them burn the tree. "If you move from cover, we initiate terminal sequence," Varys warned. Khallos ignored the warning. He looked out into the clearing, ignoring the blinding flash of pain as his broken ribs shifted. He had one final move left. One thing the Draconians could not calculate because it made no logical sense. He stood fully, swaying slightly, his torn tunic soaked dark with blood and rain. He held up his hands, empty. "Here I am," Khallos called out, his voice hoarse but steady, amplified by a desperate surge of adrenaline. "But I didn't hide your princess. I rescued her. And if you want her, Commander, you'll have to take her from my sight." This was not a surrender. This was the final challenge. Khallos was betting everything on the single. A logical premise that the sight of an unarmed, bleeding human willingly standing as a shield might, just might, make the Hegemonia hesitate long enough for something impossible to happen. Viria watched the human stand between her and the weapons of her own empire, and for the first time in her life, she understood the terrifying power of utter self-abnegation. It was a power far stronger than any plasma rifle. The air vibrated with the silent calculation of inevitable violence. Khallos stood, a fragile silhouette against the massive, rain-slicked trunk of the arbor secunda. Varys's visor analyzed the human, unarmed, internal damage severe, vital signs rapidly declining, posture defensive, intent protection. The commander processed the data. Khallos was not a threat in any military capacity. He was an obstacle of sheer irrational stubbornness. Executing him was easy, but the retrieval protocol was paramount. Ensure the princess's physical and political integrity. Human! Varys's voice boomed, layered with digital coldness. Your calculus is flawed. Your life is meaningless to us. Your death will not deter the objective. Maybe not, Khallos choked out, blood slicking his lips. He tilted his head slightly, a small, defiant smile touching his face. But it means something to her. The implied accusation hung heavy. If they killed him now, they proved Viria's life was worth less than the risk of staining their armor with peasant blood. They proved Viria was unworthy of such sacrifice. Varys felt a tremor of operational dissonance. The human was weaponizing self-destruction. The risk level, though statistically infinitesimal, was rising on the political front. Final demand: stand aside. Compliance yields survival. Refusal yields extermination. Just as Varys's armor began to cycle power for the thermal discharge, a deep, resonant metallic groan. A new voice cut through the clearing. It was Viria's. It was weak, strained by pain, but laced with an inherent authority that silenced the very jungle. Commander Varys. Viria, using the last of her strength, dragged herself partially into view from behind Khallos' knees. She leaned against his torn thigh, ignoring the pain in her ribs, her golden eyes fixed on the towering armored figure of Varys. Princess Viria, Varys replied instantly, his weapons momentarily locked. We are here for immediate extraction. The hegemonia demands nothing of me that I do not authorize. Viria interrupted, the words sharp and cold, the tone of a monarch overriding a directive. My life was saved by this creature. He is not a combatant. He is my protection. Varys's sensors flickered wildly, trying to reconcile the output. Protection? The most valuable asset in the galaxy protected by a disposable human? Princess, he is engaging in direct obstruction of a priority retrieval operation. His disposition is my command, Commander, Viria asserted, pushing the limits of her prerogative. Her voice grew stronger, fueled by the terrifying realization of the human's devotion. You will stand down. Varys hesitated. The Draconian Hegemony's power was built on absolute hierarchy. Viria was the heir. Her word was law, even if insane. Violating her direct order, while securing her, could lead to far worse repercussions in the court of Chifri than failing to immediately secure the asset. The thermal discharge power cycle halted with a soft click heard only by Varys's internal dampeners. Acknowledged, Princess Viria. Varys conceded, the metallic voice now layered with frustrated obedience. All units hold fire. Protocol switch. Protective custody of the subject designated Khallos is now authorized under Princess Viria's personal directive. The 4 other troopers, who had maintained their perfect firing formation, lowered their energy rifles simultaneously. The danger was gone, not through superior strength, but through the overwhelming weight of political legitimacy granted to a simple, reckless act of altruism. Khallos felt the sudden decompression of tension. His knees buckled immediately. He didn't fall. Viria, despite her wounds, tightened her grip around his leg, supporting his weight for a brief, bewildering moment. He looked down at the princess, who now regarded him with an expression Khallos had never seen before. Not contempt, not fear, but profound, exhausted respect. You absolute fool, she whispered, not in derision, but something akin to bewildered affection. Viria then addressed Varys, her voice regaining its full, royal resonance. Commander, you will set up a transport, but first, assign medical personnel. The human lives. He has earned that much. As Khallos finally surrendered to the darkness, collapsing gently into the slick mud, the last thing he saw was the golden eyes of the Princess Viria, heir to the hegemony, looking not at the retreating forces of her empire, but anxiously down at his broken, bleeding form. Viria did not see a disposable weakness anymore. She saw the potential for a strength her empire had never accounted for, a strength that defied logic, strategy, and power projection. The message traveled light years faster than the retrieval vessel. A princess, once arrogant and untouchable, had been saved by a simple human refusing to kneel, and for the first time in millennia, the throne of Chifri had hesitated. The balance of power, the universe would soon learn, had been irrevocably fractured by the stubborn heart of a lumberjack and a broken, muddy axe.